When a mysterious Shoshone woman saves a peaceful cowboy's life, he must choose between the quiet existence he craves and unleashing the deadly gunfighter he's tried to bury forever. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the desert air like a prayer gone wrong. Sarah Crow Feather pressed her palm against the rough bark of the Joshua tree, feeling the vibration of approaching hoofbeats through the ancient wood. 3 riders, maybe 4. The kind of men who left buzzards well-fed and widows weeping. Below in the valley, smoke curled from the chimney of a small adobe house where a man in faded denim was hanging laundry on a line. White shirts dancing in the morning breeze like surrender flags. He moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had found peace with solitude. He had no idea death was riding toward him at full gallop. Sarah's fingers found the leather grip of her father's knife. The blade had tasted blood before, but never for a stranger. Never for a white man who chose clothespins over Colts. The riders crested the hill, 4 of them, just as she'd sensed. Dust devils swirled around their horses' hooves like angry spirits. The leader wore a silver star that caught the sun wrong, throwing light in directions that made her stomach clench. Sheriff's badge. But sheriffs didn't usually ride with men whose faces belonged on wanted posters. The peaceful man below continued hanging shirts, humming something low and mournful. A hymn, maybe. Or a lullaby for the dead. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to her grandmother's spirit. Then she began her descent toward the valley, toward a choice that would change everything. The morning was about to learn the difference between peace and surrender. Thomas Whitmore. The sheriff's voice carried across the desert like a rattlesnake's warning. Been looking for you. Thomas's hand stilled on the clothesline. A white shirt hung half-pinned, one corner flapping against his chest like a wounded bird. Sarah watched from behind a cluster of barrel cacti, close enough to see the tension creep into his shoulders. Sheriff Morrison. Thomas's voice was steady as bedrock. Didn't expect company this far out. Morrison dismounted, his boots hitting the hardpan with the finality of a coffin lid. His 3 companions stayed mounted, hands resting easy on their gun butts. Professional, patient, predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Found something interesting in Tucson yesterday. Morrison reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a piece of paper. Even from her hiding spot, Sarah could see it was yellowed with age, creased from folding and unfolding. Seems there's a reward out for a man matching your description. Goes by the name Lightning Wolf. Thomas's laugh was dry as desert wind. Lightning Wolf. Haven't heard that name in years. Funny thing about names, Morrison said, unfolding the paper with deliberate slowness. They have a way of following a man no matter how far he runs. Sarah studied the wanted poster as Morrison held it up. The face sketched there was younger, harder, eyes like winter storms. But the jawline was unmistakable. The scar above the left eyebrow, barely visible now, softened by time and distance from violence. Thomas Whitmore was Lightning Wolf, and Lightning Wolf was worth $5,000. Dead or alive. That was another life, Thomas said quietly. Another man. Dead men don't hang laundry, Morrison replied. And $5,000 spends the same whether a man's reformed or not. One of the mounted men, a scarred giant with arms like tree trunks, spat tobacco juice into the dust. Just shoot him, Morrison. Sun's getting hot. But Morrison was savoring this. Sarah could see it in the way he folded the poster, tucked it back into his saddlebag with ceremonial care. This wasn't just about money. This was personal. See, Lightning Wolf killed my brother in Abilene. Put 3 bullets in him before Charlie could clear leather. Morrison's hand drifted to his gun. Been tracking you for 2 years. Thomas nodded slowly as if accepting a long-expected judgment. Charlie Morrison. Good man. Didn't deserve what happened. No, he didn't. Morrison's voice dropped to a whisper. But you're going to make it right. The desert held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for the moment when peace would shatter like glass against stone. Sarah's grip tightened on her knife. 4 against 1. The peaceful man wouldn't stand a chance. Unless Lightning Wolf remembered how to howl. You know what the funny thing is, Wolf? Morrison circled Thomas like a buzzard riding thermals. This little hideaway of yours used to belong to a friend of mine, Mexican fellow named Esperanza. Built this place for his daughter's wedding. Thomas's eyes flicked toward the house. Just for a moment, but Sarah caught it. Something passed across his face. Recognition. Pain. Esperanza sold it to you cheap, I'm guessing, Morrison continued. Probably didn't mention why he was so eager to leave. He mentioned it. Thomas's voice was barely audible. Morrison stopped circling. Did he now? Did he tell you about the night riders who came calling? About how his daughter screamed when they... Enough. The word came out like a gunshot. Sarah saw it then. The change. Subtle as a cloud passing over the sun, but unmistakable. Thomas's stance shifted. His right hand, which had been hanging loose at his side, now hovered near his hip, where a gun should be. But there was no gun. Just empty leather, and the ghost of violence passed. Esperanza told me everything, Thomas said. About Maria. About what they did to her. About how the law looked the other way because the men who did it wore badges. Morrison's smile was sharp as broken glass. The law's got a long memory, Wolf. And sometimes justice takes time. Justice. Thomas tasted the word like poison. Is that what you call it when 4 armed men ride down on one who's trying to live peaceful? I call it settling accounts. Sarah watched Thomas's face. Saw the war being fought behind his eyes. The man he'd become wrestling with the man he'd been. The peaceful cowboy who hung laundry and hummed hymns, fighting against Lightning Wolf. The gunfighter who'd once been faster than thought, deadlier than winter. The house behind them seemed to whisper with old ghosts. Maria Esperanza, who'd died on her wedding night. The riders who'd never faced justice. And now Thomas Whitmore, who'd bought this cursed ground hoping to find redemption in its shadows. You know what I think? Morrison drew his gun with practiced ease. I think you came here because you knew this was where it would end, where Lightning Wolf would finally pay for his sins. The other 3 men dismounted now, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Professional, efficient. They'd done this before. Thomas looked at his hands, soft now from honest work, calluses from rope and hammer instead of gun leather. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe this is where it ends. But Sarah had seen something the others missed. When Thomas glanced toward the house, his eyes had lingered on a particular window. The one with the loose shutter that hung at an odd angle. The one that might hide more than just memories. Here's how this works, Wolf. Morrison's gun never wavered. You can come quiet. Let us tie you up nice and neat for the ride back to Tucson. Face a judge. Maybe live long enough to see a rope. Or, Thomas asked, or you can try to run, and we'll save the territory the cost of a trial. The scarred giant, Briggs, Morrison had called him, laughed like grinding millstones. I vote for option 2, Sheriff. More fun that way. Sarah had heard enough. These weren't lawmen. They were killers wearing badges, the same kind who'd destroyed Maria Esperanza and countless others. The same kind her people had been fighting for generations. She rose from behind the cacti like a desert spirit, knife gleaming in the morning sun. 4 against 1, she called out, her voice carrying the authority of ancient mountains. Brave men, all 4 guns swung toward her, but she was already moving. Not toward them, toward the house, toward that window with the crooked shutter. Shoshone witch, Briggs snarled. Should have stayed on the reservation. Should have, Sarah agreed, diving through the window in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Inside, the house was simple, clean. A man's attempt at making peace with solitude. But Sarah's eyes went immediately to what she'd glimpsed from outside. A loose floorboard beneath the window. The wood was newer than the rest, carefully fitted but not quite perfect. Behind her, she heard Morrison shouting orders. Briggs, watch the back. Martinez, circle left. Thompson, you're with me. Footsteps on the porch, the front door rattling. Sarah pried up the floorboard with her knife. Underneath, wrapped in oiled leather, lay the tools of Lightning Wolf's former trade. 2 Colt .45s, their grips worn smooth by countless draws. a gun belt with silver conchos that caught the light like captured stars. And beneath it all, a leather journal bound with rawhide cord. She grabbed the guns first, checked the cylinders. Loaded. Ready. As if Thomas had known this day would come. The front door exploded inward. Morrison filled the doorway, gun drawn, eyes scanning the room like a hawk hunting mice. Come out, girl. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah pressed herself against the wall beside the window, guns heavy in her hands. Outside, she could hear Thomas talking, his voice still calm despite the chaos. Let her go, Morrison. This is between us. Nothing's between us anymore, Wolf. You're a dead man. Question is whether the squaw dies with you. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Squaw. The white man's word for something less than human. Something to be used and discarded. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory. When they call you by their ugly names, child, show them who you really are. Sarah Crow Feather stepped into the doorway, a gun in each hand, and showed Sheriff Morrison exactly who she was. Morrison's eyes went wide as silver dollars when he saw the guns in Sarah's hands. Not just any guns. Lightning Wolf's guns. The matched Colts that had made him legend from Dodge City to El Paso. Well, I'll be damned, Morrison breathed. The wolf's got teeth after all. Drop your weapon, Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Morrison laughed. Girl, do you have any idea what you're holding? Those guns have killed more men than cholera. You think you can just pick them up and... Sarah's right-hand Colt spoke first. The bullet took Morrison's hat clean off his head, parting his hair with surgical precision. The sound echoed across the desert like thunder. Next one goes lower, she said quietly. Morrison's laugh died in his throat. Outside, she heard Briggs shouting, What the hell was that? Your friend just learned something, Thomas called back, and Sarah heard something new in his voice. Not quite Lightning Wolf yet, but no longer the peaceful cowboy either. Something in between, something dangerous. Morrison raised his hands slowly, but his eyes never left the guns. Those belong to my brother's killer. You're holding murder weapons, girl. I'm holding justice, Sarah replied. But even as she said it, doubt crept in like desert cold. How many men had died by these guns? How much blood stained their history? She backed toward the window, keeping Morrison covered. Thomas, she called. Catch. She tossed one of the Colts through the broken window, heard it land in the dust outside with a metallic thunk. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Sarah could almost feel the change in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. The peaceful man was about to remember what it meant to be the wolf. Well, well, came Briggs's voice from outside. Look what the squaw found. A gunshot cracked across the desert. Then another, and another. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Had she just armed a killer? Had she given Lightning Wolf the tools to become a monster again? Morrison grinned like a skull. Congratulations, girl. You just turned a capture into a massacre. But the gunfire had stopped, and in the silence that followed, Sarah heard something that made her heart skip. Thomas's voice, calm and controlled. Briggs is down. Martinez is running. Thompson's got a bullet in his shoulder, but he'll live. A pause. Your move, Morrison. Sarah stared at the sheriff, saw the confidence drain from his face like water from a broken jar. Lightning Wolf was awake, and he was everything the legends claimed. How? Morrison whispered. Thomas appeared in the doorway behind Sarah, the smoking Colt in his hand. But his eyes were still kind, still human. Same way I always did it, he said quietly, by being faster than the other fellow. Sarah looked between them, the corrupt sheriff and the reformed gunfighter, two men carrying the weight of their choices, their sins, their attempts at redemption or revenge. The journal, she said suddenly, remembering the leather-bound book she'd seen beneath the guns. There was a journal in the hiding place. Thomas's face went pale. Sarah, don't... But she was already moving. diving back through the window, grabbing the journal from its hiding place. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed but intact. She opened it to the first page and felt the world shift beneath her feet. The handwriting was careful, precise. A woman's hand. "My dearest Thomas," it began. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened and I am gone. But there are things you must know. Things about the night riders, things about Morrison, things about why they really came for me." Sarah looked up at Thomas, saw the pain in his eyes, the truth she was about to uncover. "Maria Esperanza," she whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. "My wife." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Wife. Thomas had been married to Maria Esperanza, the woman who died on her wedding night, the woman whose murder had brought him to this cursed ground seeking, what? Redemption? Revenge? "Keep reading," Morrison said from behind her, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Gets real interesting." Sarah's eyes flew across the pages, Maria's careful script revealing secrets that made her stomach clench. The men who came that night weren't random raiders. They knew exactly what they were looking for, the deed to the silver mine Papa discovered in the hills. Morrison was their leader, though he stayed back, let the others do the dirty work. They thought killing me would make Papa sell cheap, leave town broken. Sarah flipped the page, her hands trembling, but Papa was smarter than they knew. He'd already signed the mine over to me as a wedding gift. And I'd already signed it over to you, my beloved Thomas. The deed is hidden where only you would think to look. In the place where we first kissed, beneath the old oak by the creek. "Silver mine," Sarah breathed. "Worth about $200,000, Morrison confirmed, his gun now trained on both of them. Funny thing about grief, makes a man careless. Thomas here never even looked for the deed, just buried his wife and ran off to play gunfighter, leaving a fortune sitting in the ground." Thomas's face was stone, but Sarah could see the storm building behind his eyes. "You killed her for money." "I killed her for a lot of money," Morrison corrected. "And now, thanks to your little squaw friend here, I know exactly where to find it." Outside, Sarah could hear horses approaching. More riders, Morrison's backup, arriving right on schedule. "See, the thing about being sheriff," Morrison continued conversationally, "is you get to plan ahead, send word to friends, arrange for help when you need it." The sound of boots on the porch, heavy, multiple sets. "How many?" Thomas asked quietly. "Enough," Morrison smiled. "More than even Lightning Wolf can handle." Sarah counted the footsteps. 6 men, maybe 7, all armed, all professional. The kind of men who killed for money and slept sound afterward. Thomas looked at her and she saw the choice being made behind his eyes. The peaceful man was dying, being consumed by the wolf. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about justice. About Maria. About the silver mine that had cost so many lives. "The creek," he said quietly. "You know where it is?" Sarah nodded. She'd seen it from the hills, a thin line of green cutting through the desert about a mile north. "When the shooting starts, you run. Find the deed. Get it to the territorial marshal in Phoenix. I'm not leaving you." "You are." His voice carried the authority of Lightning Wolf now, the gunfighter who'd never lost a battle. "Because if Morrison gets that deed, he'll own half the territory. And men like him, they're never satisfied with enough." The front door creaked open. Morrison's reinforcements were inside now, spreading through the house like a plague. "Time's up, Wolf," Morrison called. "Come out peaceful, and maybe the girl lives long enough to see sunset." Thomas checked his gun. 5 shots left. Sarah still had the other Colt, fully loaded, 11 bullets between them, against 7 professional killers. "Maria's journal," Thomas said suddenly. "What else does it say?" Sarah flipped through the pages quickly, looking for anything that might help. Near the end, she found it. "If something happens to me, Thomas, remember what Papa always said. The desert keeps its own justice. Sometimes you just have to know where to dig." She looked up at Thomas, saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "The mine," he whispered. "It's not just silver, it's—" The window exploded inward as Morrison's men opened fire. Glass and lead filled the air like deadly rain. Sarah dove behind an overturned table, Thomas rolling in the opposite direction. The peaceful cowboy was gone now, consumed entirely by Lightning Wolf. And Lightning Wolf was about to remind the desert why legends never truly die. The war for Maria's legacy had begun. Bullets chewed through the adobe walls like hungry termites as Sarah pressed herself against the floor, Maria's journal clutched to her chest. Thomas, no, Lightning Wolf now, moved through the chaos like a deadly dancer, each shot precise, economical. 2 of Morrison's men were already down, their blood seeping into the wooden planks where Maria had once walked as a bride. "The mine shaft," Thomas shouted over the gunfire. Maria's father didn't just find silver, he found something else. Sarah risked a glance at the journal, flipping to a page she'd missed before. Maria's handwriting was hurried here, desperate. "Papa made me swear never to tell anyone. But if I die, someone must know. The silver vein runs right through an old Spanish treasure cache. Gold, jewels, enough to buy and sell half of Arizona territory. But Papa was scared. Said the Spanish buried more than treasure down there. Said they buried their sins too." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the desert wind whistling through the bullet holes. "Morrison doesn't know," she called to Thomas. "He thinks it's just silver." Thomas put 2 bullets through the doorway, driving back another attacker. "Then we keep it that way. For now." But Sarah was reading further, and what she found made her blood freeze. "The Spanish didn't just bury treasure, Thomas, they buried people. The Shoshone people they enslaved to dig the silver. Papa found bones down there. Hundreds of them. My people's bones, Thomas. My grandmother's people. Worked to death in the darkness and left to rot with the gold." Sarah's hands shook as the truth hit her. She wasn't just fighting for Thomas or for justice. She was fighting for her ancestors, for the Shoshone dead who'd never received proper burial, whose spirits still wandered the desert seeking peace. "There's more," she whispered, but her words were lost in another volley of gunfire. Morrison's voice boomed from outside. "Burn them out. I want that deed, and I want Lightning Wolf's head." The smell of smoke began to drift through the shattered windows. They were running out of time. Sarah flipped to the journal's final entry, dated the day of Maria's wedding. "I've made my choice, Thomas. The mine will never be opened. Too much blood, too much pain buried in those tunnels. I've written instructions for the territorial marshal. The whole area is to be declared a sacred burial ground protected by federal law. The deed I'm giving you isn't for a silver mine, my love. It's for a cemetery, a place where the dead can finally rest." The truth hit Sarah like lightning. Maria hadn't died for a fortune. She'd died trying to protect it, trying to ensure that her ancestors' bones would never be disturbed by men like Morrison. "Thomas," Sarah called, but he was already moving, having heard the change in her voice. He slid across the floor to her position, reloading with practiced efficiency. "What is it?" She showed him the final entry. Watched his face change as he read. The wolf's fury giving way to something deeper, something that transcended revenge. She knew, he whispered. She knew what would happen if Morrison found out. "The deed isn't for a mine," Sarah said. "It's for a graveyard. Your wife died protecting my people's bones." Thomas looked at her then, really looked at her. Saw not just the Shoshone woman who'd saved his life, but the descendant of the people whose suffering had created the very treasure Morrison was killing for. "Then we finish what she started," he said quietly. Outside, the smoke was getting thicker. Morrison's men were closing in, using the fire as cover. Soon they'd have to run or burn. But Sarah had one more page to read, one final secret that would change everything. P.S. Thomas, if you're reading this, look for the false bottom in Papa's old trunk. There's something there you need to see. Something that will make Morrison wish he'd never heard the name Esperanza. Sarah looked at Thomas. "Where's her father's trunk?" Thomas's eyes went to the bedroom, Under the bed. But Sarah, we don't have time. We make time. She was already moving, crawling across the floor as bullets whined overhead. The bedroom was thick with smoke, but she found the trunk, an old Spanish chest, ornately carved, heavy as a coffin. Her fingers found the hidden catch Maria had described. The false bottom lifted, revealing a leather portfolio tied with red ribbon. Inside were documents, official papers bearing territorial seals, and photographs, dozens of them. Sarah's breath caught. The photographs showed Morrison and his men at various locations throughout the territory. But they weren't alone. In every image, they were with other men. Men in expensive suits, politicians, judges, businessmen. And in the center of every photograph was a symbol, a silver wolf's head pendant worn by each man. Thomas, she whispered. Morrison isn't just a corrupt sheriff. He's part of something bigger. She grabbed the portfolio and crawled back to where Thomas was making his last stand. Showed him the photographs. His face went white. The Silver Wolf Society. I thought it was just a rumor. What is it? A secret organization. Businessmen, politicians, lawmen. They've been buying up land all over the territory, using violence and corruption to drive out anyone who won't sell. Thomas's voice was grim. Maria's mine wasn't their first target. It won't be their last. Sarah understood now. This wasn't just about one corrupt sheriff or one silver mine. This was about a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. A conspiracy that had killed Maria Esperanza and would kill countless others if it wasn't stopped. The photographs, she said. They're evidence, proof of the conspiracy. Thomas nodded. Maria's father must have been investigating them, gathering evidence. Evidence that died with him, and with Maria. Not if we get it to the right people, but even as he said it, they both knew the truth. Morrison's men were closing in, the house was burning, and they were down to their last few bullets. The Silver Wolf Society had won again, unless Lightning Wolf had one more trick up his sleeve. The smoke was so thick now that Sarah could barely see Thomas across the room, but she could hear him moving, checking his ammunition with the methodical precision of a man who'd faced death more times than he could count. 5 bullets left, he called softly. 6, Sarah replied, checking her own gun. 11 shots, 7 men. Thomas's laugh was dry as desert bones. I've faced worse odds. But Sarah was studying the photographs again, something nagging at her. In one image, Morrison stood with a group of well-dressed men in front of what looked like a government building, the territorial capital in Phoenix. And there, in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was a familiar face. Thomas, she whispered. Look at this. She crawled across the smoke-filled room, thrust the photograph into his hands, watched his face change as he recognized the figure in the background. Judge Harrison, he breathed. The territorial judge, the one who's supposed to be investigating corruption in the sheriff's departments. He's one of them, Sarah said. The Silver Wolf Society owns the very man who's supposed to be stopping them. Thomas stared at the photograph and Sarah saw something die in his eyes. Not hope. He'd lost that long ago. But the last vestige of faith in the system he'd once served. There's no law coming to help us, he said quietly. No cavalry riding over the hill, just us. Just us, Sarah agreed. But as she said it, she noticed something else in the photograph, something that made her heart race with sudden possibility. Thomas, look at the date on this photograph. He squinted through the smoke. 3 days ago. 3 days ago, Judge Harrison was in Phoenix. But yesterday, Morrison told his men that Harrison had signed the warrant for your arrest. Said he'd gotten word from the judge personally. Thomas's eyes sharpened. Morrison's lying. Harrison doesn't even know I'm here. Which means Morrison isn't acting on official orders. He's gone rogue, even from his own organization. The implications hit them both at the same time. Morrison wasn't just corrupt, he was desperate, acting without authorization from the Silver Wolf Society, which meant he was vulnerable. The deed, Thomas said suddenly, Morrison thinks it's for a silver mine worth $200,000. But if the society finds out he's been operating without orders, going after unauthorized targets, they'll cut him loose, Sarah finished. Or worse. Thomas smiled for the first time since the shooting started. Not the peaceful smile of the cowboy, but the predatory grin of Lightning Wolf. "Sarah, how good are you at acting?" Before she could answer, Morrison's voice boomed from outside. "Time's up, Wolf. Come out now or we burn you out." Thomas cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted back, "Morrison, I want to make a deal." Silence. Then, "You're in no position to make deals." "I am if you want the real treasure." Sarah stared at him. What was he doing? "The silver mine's just the beginning," Thomas continued. "Maria's father found something else down there. Something worth 10 times what you think." Another silence. Longer this time. Sarah could almost hear Morrison's greed warring with his caution. "You're lying." "Am I?" Ask yourself why a simple Mexican rancher would hide a deed so carefully. Why he'd die before revealing its location. Thomas looked at Sarah, winked, then shouted, "Spanish gold, Morrison, a conquistador's treasure cache. Enough to buy your own territory." The silence stretched so long that Sarah began to wonder if Morrison had simply decided to burn them out anyway. Then she heard it, voices arguing outside. Morrison's men questioning the plan, wanting to know more about this supposed treasure. Greed. The one thing that could make killers hesitate. "Prove it," Morrison finally called. Thomas grabbed Maria's journal, tore out a page covered with her father's sketches, rough maps of mine shafts and tunnel systems. He wrapped it around a stone and threw it through the window. "That's just a sample. The real maps are hidden with the deed." More arguing outside. Sarah could hear Morrison's authority beginning to crack as his men smelled a bigger payday. "Here's the deal," Thomas shouted. "I'll take you to the treasure, but I want safe passage for the woman." "No deal, she comes too." "Then no treasure." Sarah understood now. Thomas was buying time, sowing discord among Morrison's men. But more than that, he was setting a trap. "The creek," he whispered to her. "When we get there, be ready to run, not away toward the mine entrance. There's something Maria's father left there, something that'll end this once and for all." "What?" Thomas's smile was sharp as a blade. "Dynamite, enough to bring down half the mountain." Sarah's blood chilled. "You're going to blow up the mine?" "I'm going to blow up the evidence, the bones, the treasure, everything. Make sure the Silver Wolf Society never gets their hands on it." "And us?" Thomas checked his gun one more time. "Lightning Wolf's been dead for 2 years, Sarah. Maybe it's time to make it official." But Sarah was already shaking her head. "There's another way." She pulled out the last photograph from the portfolio, the one she'd been saving, the one that would change everything. "Look at this," she whispered. The photograph showed Morrison meeting with a man in an expensive suit. But this time, the silver wolf pendant was clearly visible around the stranger's neck. And in the bottom corner, someone had written a name in careful script, Senator William Hayes, Territorial Governor-elect. Thomas stared at the photograph, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The next territorial governor is part of the conspiracy," Sarah said. "If we can get this evidence to the federal marshals, we can bring down the whole organization." Outside, Morrison was losing control of his men. Sarah could hear them arguing about the treasure, about shares, about whether to trust Lightning Wolf's word. "But first," Thomas said, "we have to survive the next hour." He stood up, walked to the window and called out, "Morrison, I'll make you a counteroffer." "I'm listening." Thomas held up the portfolio of photographs. "I've got something here that's worth more than all the silver in Arizona. Something that'll make you the most powerful man in the territory." "What are you talking about?" "Evidence, Morrison. Proof of corruption that goes all the way to the top. Names, dates, photographs. The kind of information that can destroy careers or make them." Sarah watched Morrison's face through the smoke and flame. Saw the exact moment when greed overcame caution. "Show me," Thomas smiled. The trap was set. Now came the hard part, springing it without getting killed. Morrison stepped into the burning house like a man walking into his own coronation. His gun was drawn but lowered, his eyes fixed on the leather portfolio in Thomas's hands with the hunger of a starving wolf. "Easy now, Wolf," Morrison said, his voice thick with anticipation. "Let's see what you've got." Thomas held the portfolio just out of reach. "First, your men lower their weapons. All of them. You're hardly in a position to make demands." "I'm in a position to burn these photographs," Thomas replied, holding the portfolio near a burning beam. "Wonder how the Silver Wolf Society would feel about losing evidence of their operations." Morrison's face went pale. "How do you know about—" "I know everything, Morrison. About the society, about Senator Hayes, about the judges and politicians you've bought." Thomas's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "Question is, what are you willing to do to keep it quiet?" The corrupt sheriff gestured to his men, who reluctantly lowered their weapons. But Sarah noticed they didn't holster them. Professional killers, waiting for their moment. "Now," Morrison said, extending his hand. "Let me see those photographs." Thomas opened the portfolio, showed Morrison the first image, the one with Judge Harrison, watched the sheriff's eyes widen with recognition and possibility. "My God," Morrison breathed. "Do you know what this means?" "It means you've got a choice to make," Thomas said quietly. And there it was, the moment Sarah had been dreading, the moral crossroads that would define everything that came after. Thomas looked at Morrison, then at Sarah, then back at the photographs. She could see the war being fought behind his eyes. Lightning Wolf, who'd killed for money and reputation. Thomas Whitmore, who'd tried to find peace in the desert. And now, something new. A man caught between justice and survival, between the easy path and the right one. "Here's what I'm thinking," Thomas said slowly. "These photographs are worth a fortune to the right buyer. The Silver Wolf Society would pay anything to get them back. Their enemies would pay even more to make them public." Morrison nodded eagerly. "Exactly. We could be rich, Wolf. Richer than any silver mine could make us. Or," Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "we could do the right thing. Turn them over to the federal marshals. Bring down the whole corrupt system." Sarah watched Morrison's face change as he realized what Thomas was really offering. Not partnership, a test. A choice between easy money and hard justice. The right thing? Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The right thing got your wife killed, Wolf. The right thing gets good people buried while bastards like me get rich." "Maybe," Thomas agreed. "But it also means my wife didn't die for nothing."